beautiful to me. You are so beautiful to me. Can't you see? You're everything I hope for. You're everything I need. You are so beautiful to me. I wanted to start with my intention for this evening. Who am I? What am I doing here? Why did I come to speak to you? Big Ideas Fest 2016. I like the name of that. Big Ideas Fest. It's a celebration. It's a feast. It's full of yumminess and delight. And some challenges. You're up for it. I can see that. How many of you have been part of anything that's like called re-engineering of processes? Anybody been through that kind of wonderful thing? Re-engineering processes, yeah. How many of you have ever been in an organization that's been restructured? Anybody been in that? Yeah, okay. How many of you had to redesign your curriculum over and over and over again? Yes, we do a lot of that. Now, how many of you have actually restructured, re-engineered, redesigned you? Okay, a few of you attempted working on that. That's what we're going to be talking about this evening. We spend a lot of time restructuring, redesigning, re-engineering, working on the structures and who's reporting to who and what we're going to say, what the content's going to be, all those kind of things, but not a lot of work on what's going on in here with this one. The work that I'm going to share with you this evening comes primarily from a study and a book that's called Trade Up, Reinventing Leadership from the Inside Out. I've dedicated my life since I left Silicon Valley 13 years ago to working with leaders and individuals to help them understand what is going on inside, because what's going on inside is what's showing up on the outside. Ashanti did such a beautiful job warming us up, opening us up, beginning this process of looking at the inside. Now, we all had those things that we talked about in the masks that we wanted to show to the world, and we had those things that we weren't so much wanting to show to the world that often, that we were holding close. But the thing about it is, as a leader, as a teacher, as a student, as a person moving through this world as the unique you that you are, whatever it is that's on the back of that mask, those words, those ideas that you may have about yourself, you're broadcasting them, even if you don't think you are. So what we're going to work with tonight is another tool for you. I think what Ashanti did with the mask idea is a beautiful tool for you to think about. What mask am I wearing now? What can I take away? What can I allow to be revealed about myself? We're going to work with your ideas tonight. We all are operating on what we call context. We're operating from a prevailing idea. We're operating from a conclusion about anything. You have conclusions about how the world should work. You have conclusions about how your student should be. You have conclusions about how your mate should be. You have conclusions about everything. Now, conclusions and facts are not the same thing. Sometimes we treat our conclusions like facts. We conclude that this person doesn't have our back. We treat it as a fact, and we act on that. We conclude that this other person doesn't know what they're doing, and we treat that as a fact, and we act on it. Most of what we are doing with our lives is concluding and then acting from conclusions. And there's nothing wrong with that, except for that we don't remain aware of the difference. So I invite you to play with me a little bit for a few minutes that I have with you, with this idea of revealing some of the conclusions that we're operating from as human beings. This conference is about educating to be human. Everything has a design. We have a car, for example. Just give me a couple of the systems in a car that are in its design. What does it have? Steering, transmission, brakes, right? There's a way that a car is designed so that if you are walking along and you see that there's a car and it's down, wrapped around a tree, and it's crashed around a tree, you don't conclude that the car lifted its wings and flew down there. You conclude that something went wrong with something in its design. It was steered down there, the brakes failed, something went wrong. Now, when it comes to human beings, ourselves, we don't think the same way about it. If we find ourselves wrapped around a tree of sorts, something did not go the way we wanted it to, we don't think it has anything to do with our design. We think it has something to do with someone else, circumstances, those kind of things. And it's not about blaming ourselves for the circumstances we find ourselves in. It's about empowering ourselves to recognize that how we think and the ideas we have actually are driving our behavior and driving our results. So what will happen is we will not get the desired consequences in a situation. Has anyone ever had a situation where they did not get the desired consequences? Okay. It happens. So it happened to you. And what do? You go back and you try to behave differently. You go back and you try to research it. You go back and you restructure. You give the person a different job. You try a different tactic, right? But you don't actually go and say, what's the bubble over my head? What was I actually thinking? What was I concluding when I acted on this? What was I thinking? Now, I know that many people had different reactions on November 9th. Some was the Beatles song, Good Day, Sunshine. There were some people singing that, But there were some people singing, Yesterday, all my troubles, right? It seems so far away. So those are contexts that people have. One's like, it's good day, sunshine. Yesterday, all my troubles seemed so far away. Now they're here to stay, right? Those are ideas that we have about what we see in front of us. And based on that idea that we have, we're going to behave from it. We're going to curl up in bed, or we're going to go do something else, right? So let's look at this concept and have you think a little bit about one circumstance in your life or in your work when you weren't getting the consequences that you were looking for. You got more undesired consequences. Think about a situation that didn't turn out the way you wanted it to turn out. Now, as you think about that situation, what were you thinking? What was the bubble over your head? What was your prevailing idea? I'll give you an example. A project doesn't come in on time. It fails. It doesn't do what you thought it was going to do. Okay? That's not what you wanted. The bubble of your head could be many things. I didn't do it right. They didn't do it right. If only I had listened to so-and-so. If only so-and-so had listened to me. It wasn't possible to get it done. I was thwarted. I didn't have the resources. You could have ideas like that. And whatever the ideas that you have about that, the conclusion that you've drawn about it, will drive your behavior. Now let's say that before the project started, I asked you to look at what is your prevailing idea going into this project. What's your prevailing idea? And you're saying, I know we can do this if we just work hard. Let's say that was your prevailing idea. Seems like a nice prevailing idea. But what happened was you worked extremely hard and it still didn't work out. Right? Because you thought that if you just worked hard, then it's automatically going to work out at the end. And you had undesirable consequences. So sometimes you have to relook at the idea that you're thinking when you start something. And the reason I'm bringing it up for tonight is because you're about to go into several days of big ideas, innovative ideas, ideas that may be yours, ideas that may be someone else's. Has anyone ever had a big idea and had somebody else say something about it that wasn't necessarily lifting? Anyone ever had that happen? Okay. So just tell me one kind of thing that people say. What does someone say to you ever when you have a big idea? It's not going to work, right? It's not going to work. And you don't want to admit it here necessarily, but has anyone ever shared a big idea with you and you said something along the lines of, it's not going to work? Or tried that before, been there, or asked you a series of very pointed questions like, well, what about this? What about that? What about this? What about that? What about this, right? And was it intended to lift? Or was it intended to tamp them down a little bit, right? Sometimes we're afraid of the big ideas because we're afraid to what? Fail, risk, right? And sometimes succeed. Because if it's a big idea and we succeed at it, we're not really sure what happens next. So even that sometimes will stop us from doing it. So context is something that you are operating from every day, all the time. One of the things about context that I also want to mention is that the first thing for you to do as an individual in your own life or as a leader among other people is to reveal the context that's operating. The one that's operating in you and the one that's operating maybe at your table, in your classroom. What is the prevailing idea here? You reveal it. Put it on loudspeaker so you can look at it. Once you reveal what you're thinking about something, then you can say, well, does this serve me? What's the upside of this idea? If I've decided that I have to do it myself or it won't get done right, there's upsides to that. It'll probably get done the way I want it to get done. I won't have to involve anybody else. I might be able to get it done quicker. But if I think that if I don't do it myself, it won't get done right, what are some of the downsides of that? No one on the team gets to work. I don't get to bring people along with me. I won't have a shared success. So you take an inventory on it. You say, well, if this is the idea I have to own it. There's good to it, and there's parts that actually are not necessarily going to get me the consequences I'm looking for. So when you notice that you have that idea, you can then redesign. You can say, what's another way I could see this that could possibly have me behave differently? Because what we do is we have a set of behaviors, we have impact, and sometimes, as I said, it's undesirable. And instead of going to figure out what it's sitting in, the conclusion that we've drawn, we just go back and keep changing our behavior. And you can put in here process, you can put in here structure, you just keep changing the mechanics. Rather than saying, what is the fundamental conclusion that's operating behind all this? Is it a conclusion that it's possible, or that it's going to be hard, or it's not possible? Does anyone remember the very old movie Apollo 13, or the story of Apollo 13? So the simple story about that is it's a very good illustration of context. If you recall, there were people in space who were going to die because there was no resolution for getting them back to the Earth. And they had done everything they know how to do, every single thing they know how to do, and nothing was working. And you heard the famous words, Houston, we've got a problem, people are there sweating, they're at the computers, it goes on and on for hours, and eventually they give up. And they just sit there staring blankly at their screens, knowing that all those astronauts are not going to make it back. Then there's a leader who comes in the room, and he says a few words. I think they're 5 words. Anybody remember what those were? Failure is not an option. What do you think happened to the people when that context shift happened? The first context they had over their head, they're doomed, they're going to die, there's nothing we can do, we've done everything. And you can even feel that, right? Everybody bent over, they, hunched over, their behavior was just paralyzed. Failure is not an option. All of a sudden, there was new energy. Since failure was not an option, I'm going to behave differently. I'm going to have to do something different here. I have a brand new idea up here. I'm not giving up. Failure is not an option. So they found some strange thing with a bulb and something else, and somehow they saved the day, and those astronauts came home. But they had given up before that time. They had completely given up. So that shift in context, that shift in the idea will change the behavior. When we have a new idea about possibility, we change our behavior and we get different results. Anybody ever had a terrible breakup in their life? Yeah, maybe a few. So you think about this, all of your friends, if not you, someone in your life has had this situation where the person that they thought they were the love of their life adored them, everything. They break up, and what do? They lay around, they're so sad, they can't even move, they got pizza boxes everywhere, they're just like, oh my God, they're not even dressed, they're not, they're not combing their hair, everything just terrible, And then the phone rings, and it's that person saying, I don't know what I was thinking. You're perfect. You're the one for me. And then what happens? They're up, they're out, they're in the shower, they're going, they're dancing, they're ready to rock and roll. Same person, 2 minutes later, with a different idea, right? First idea was loser, lost it, no hope, whatever the context was over their head, and their behavior reflected that. This new idea that maybe I'm back. Suddenly, posture, everything's completely different. And I'm making it extreme, but we tend to do that. We don't know that what we're thinking about, what we've concluded, what our prevailing idea is, drives our behavior. So when we want to be open and receptive and excited, we have to know what the bubble of our head is. What am I thinking about this? So when someone this week says, I think you can transform your classroom by just doing these 3 things, and what happens over your head? Not so much. Maybe, I don't know. Tried that. If that happens, just make a correction and say, okay, wait, I'm going to be open to this possibility. So I don't know if these 3 things are actually going to transform my classroom. I don't know if these 3 things are going to transform my school. I don't know if these 3 things are going to transform me. But I'm willing to check this out because I don't know whether or not these 3 things will transform. So that in itself could be enough of a shift to get you moving. It doesn't have to be you swing from, I don't think so, to absolutely, I'm going to do all 3. You even just make the slightest shift that says, I'm open to the possibility. It's possible. What do they see that I don't see? So I invite you to consider noticing your own context, noticing the bubble of your head this whole week that you're here, these 3 days. Noticing when it needs to be shifted, because if your energy is moving down, if your energy is closing off, if you notice that your heart is not available and open, you need to change your mind. Change your idea about how you're considering this. Watch that you don't consider conclusions you've drawn about anything you hear and treat them as if they're facts. They're ideas. And this is the Big Ideas Fest. And I know that great things are happening here. Thank you.